And we are live. And yes, we're going to get into trouble today. So apologies to everyone who gets their feelings hurt during today's show, but it's all for a good cause. Anyhow, I'm joined by returning champions Josh Greenbaum and Bonnie Tinder, or Bonnie Duncan Tinder, I guess. Raven Intel. Bonnie, welcome. Josh, welcome.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
Yeah, always fun, John. And it's good to be here with Bonnie. I just want to say that's a welcome addition. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is going to be good. This notion of customer success and how we're falling short, or how we can live up to the potential of phrase, has become an important debate. And when I wrote this blog post, I've been kind of cooking up for a while on this topic. It kind of set off a spark. Josh issued not really a rebuttal, though. I think it was I
don't think so.
More of a companion piece than anything. Yeah. And now we want to fill in the gap on both of our posts with some of Bonnie's thinking on this topic. And basically the way I think about customer success is that I think it's what I call it has a buzzword boomerang effect. As soon as you start using the term, it's funny how then you're kind of holding up a customer success mirror to yourself. And so after hearing from, I don't know, the 100th vendor this year about how great their customer success programs were and how successful all their customers were, I kind of blew a gasket. And so I wrote a post about that. Attention vendors, please stop the customer success hype train unless you have these 6 proof points. Wrote that on Diginomica. And the thing I did on that post is I picked 6 proof points that I think would be very hard to disagree with, including things like your great NPS score isn't enough. Why? Because it's a lagging indicator, way too static. Anyway, I went through a bunch of them. Where's your customer bill of rights? Have your SI partners embraced your KPIs? Are you working at cross purposes? These are really difficult. And one of the ones I said are where's your auditing and licensing dashboards? Because how can you have customer success if you're going to have a surprise audit with one of your customers, which by the way still happens a lot? We might get back to that topic.
We might.
So the reason I did all that was because I really think it's time to challenge ourselves on what the potential for this really is. But I intentionally limited my focus largely to the vendor community. And so Josh was cooking up some stuff on the customer side anyway, I think, because Josh, your post, it didn't come off like kind of a reactive rant. It came off like something you've been on the slow burn for a while there, because it was a really inspired post. But instead of attention vendors, you did attention customers. So tell us about that.
Well, it has been a slow burn for a long time. And, one of my aphorisms, is that it takes 3 to really screw up a project: vendor, partner, and a customer. And so I figured, let's really do the thing that no one likes to do, which is point a finger at customers. Everyone's trying to sort of to around the problem, treat them with kid gloves, because of course they're the ultimate source of the gravy train that we all feed on. But I think that really a little tough love was warranted. It always has been. And I had been formulating this and sort of keeping lists and kind of, and then I saw that and think, this is perfect, yin yang, let's talk to them. And again, it's tough love. It's done from that perspective of, we the industry want everybody to take responsibility. And in this case, the customer. And I think, and one of the things that's bothered me for a long time is that, customers end up being complacent to a large degree. It's almost built into the model that we expect these projects not to go well. We expect the value to be, so-so, and we got to stop that. And I think, customers, because they hold the purse strings, have the ability to really do something about it, and they should.
You threw down the phrase culture of mediocrity, Josh, so you weren't messing around. You included a number of cool aphorisms or proof points in your post. Do you want to just grab a couple right now that like really jump out at you today as far as what customers need to take ownership from?
Yeah, I mean, that's, the flip side of it takes three parties to really screw up a project is, of course, success means the active participation of all three parties, vendor, service provider, and customer. So, my challenge, my 11, because 6 wasn't enough. I had to go for 11 proof points for customers was, really the basic of you're actually in charge. Don't forget, work with the customers who really do the kind of things that John, you say in your post, which is what the catalyst was so perfect for. Is like, I've been thinking about this. Oh, hey, my point is already taken up by an excellent post by John, so I'll go for that. And the issues about transparency, about making contracting better, about the whole kind of concept of let's do a better job. Just ask your vendor to do a better job being that partner that they've always said they are. And I think you and I have talked about this in Bonnie as well. I'm a sole proprietor. I've been that way for 30 years. If I treated my customers the way certain vendors treat their customers, I would have been out of business long ago. It's not maybe the perfect model, but this is what we need to do. I think there and then you start looking at, well, okay, now that I've got some of these basics, what about service and support? What do I get from my vendor? What do I get from my vendor's partner? This their ecosystem I'm in. I want them to I want to sort of pressure them to have a role in customer success as well. And then, Bonnie's going to be the expert on the partner ecosystem in a second. Obviously, and again, tip of the hat to Raven and my own still alive dog in this fight, ProQ. You need objective third-party data to do this, and you want partners that customers that really stick to this stuff and don't pretend, don't make it this virtue signaling we're there for you kind of stuff, while they're really there for the investor. I think that's really the thing. Who's the vendor really working for? If they're not working for the customer, then they're working for the investors and their own stock price and their own pocketbook, and that's wrong. And then the last two in my 11, which I've sort of abbreviated, don't cut corners around training. Oh my God, that's like absolutely. I can bang my head against the wall at the number of times I've seen these contracts just flake out because, oh well, we had budget for training, but we ran over budget, so we'll just skip the training. And then finally get help. And this was, of course, a little self-serving, but Lord knows I couldn't possibly begin to satisfy all the demand for having a objective third party sitting in the room, helping you as a customer balance all these incoming problems. So that was sort of my quick overview. And I got a lot of pushback, good pushback for the most part. I've been starting the engine in the car every morning. No one's trying to blow me up yet, so I must be okay.
Yeah, I think your post is essential reading. I put in a link to mine, which also contains a link to Josh's. I'll post Josh's link a little bit later. I don't want to bombard the chat too much with a bunch of links at once, but those of you in the chat who have views on what it takes to actually achieve meaningful customer success, not BS hype, are welcome to chime in. This topic's not going away, and I think I was really glad for what Josh did, because look, I mean, I really hung vendors out to dry a little bit with some really challenging criteria, and it's absolutely fair that it takes multiple parties to screw up a project. The reason I wanted to make vendors a little bit uncomfortable is I didn't want them to take comfort in the fact that there's other parties involved. I wanted them to, because the thing is that customers don't brag to me about how great their projects are. And so I didn't really reach an overdose level on the customer side just yet. But Josh and I don't really have fundamental differences on this topic. So I guess my promo was slightly link baity, but I think there is some interesting debate to be had around, what to emphasize and which parties should be kind of brought to the table. So we'll see about that. But I don't want to take too much time away from Bonnie here, because the reason we asked Bonnie to join us is because the obvious missing piece in this discussion is the role of the SI and the partner in all of this, right? And one of the things that that really got me going on this was going back to the Rise with SAP initiative. And I don't want to really single out SAP too much here, but they provoked me on this topic because there was some talk about one handshake and one contract, with Josh, you will recall this talk. And the question was, I think everyone kind of got excited because they were like, wow, how did SAP get their SIs to sign on to the same contract, because that implies the same set of KPIs and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, that wasn't the case. It's actually two separate contracts, as we clarified. But the lingering point remained, which was not just for SAP, but for any enterprise project that involves a third party. Are they working at cross purposes like I kind of talked about in my post and you also covered, or are they really fully aligned with what the goals are here? And so we said, well, why don't we ask someone who really lives this in and out every day and find out exactly where this all stands? And so Bonnie's got some stuff to share with us, including, I think, a couple of curveballs that may make this debate even trickier. So, yeah. Bonnie, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you. And, I would echo what both of you have said. And so much of what we see in the customer experience during implementation remains the sentiment of a customer through the lifetime of the partnership. And the implementation and that first impression that they get is through the deployment partner, through that SI. And good, bad, or ugly, if an implementation goes poorly, it is very difficult to get that relationship back on track. And why it's so critical for that, initial taste of the customer experience to be positive. And that's in some cases hard to control when it's, a third party, really managing the implementation side. So there's a lot of variability, let's just say, in customer experience, starting with implementation.
Right. Just real quick, a couple quick comments. Brent, on you came here for the fight. I will try to draw that out a little more when we get further into the discussion. I just want to go over some of Bonnie's research first. I don't want Josh and I to get into some kind of stupid mano thing when we have some really good content from Bonnie to share. So that's the reason why.
Brent. Why do we satisfy Brent that way?
Yeah. And I don't want to get too far into SAP here when you say SAP was never about one master contract in the comments. Yeah, of course. But if you go back in time, that was a promotional part of Rise that caused a lot of confusion. So that's, of course, that wasn't the case. And there's a lot of good reasons why you wouldn't have one master contract. But the discussion around sharing responsibility for a product is another matter entirely. And that's why we're here today. So Bonnie, can you just give our audience just a little more perspective on how you come by the data that you're gathering, sort of what you're doing at Raven Intel and how it is that you're able to kind of speak to this and maybe also help us to understand, because there's different kinds of SIs and partners, what your research focus is, so we can kind of know. We're not going to be able to cover all the variety of SIs and partners in one discussion. So,
yeah. So Raven Intelligence is a peer review site, meaning that customers, once they've completed a project, will write a review about that project, about the partner that helped them with that project, as well as, the project itself. And we ask a series of questions about, their feelings on a project, which are very valid. So were they satisfied? What strengths did the partner have? What strengths did the software vendor have? But we also ask a series of discrete analytical questions. Was the project delivered on time? Was it on budget? Did the team change? And things that we can really draw relationships, across multiple different types of software and different projects to grade a project. Was this successful in the end? What about it? Delivered the value, et cetera. So we measure all of those things directly from the voice of the customer. So all of our reviews are written by customers. They're vetted by us to ensure that every single one that's on our site is legitimate and verified. So we have over 1,300 projects that we have looked at. And these 1,300 projects have been projects completed in the last 24 months across enterprise cloud software. So, of course, we mentioned SAP, Workday, Oracle, UKG, Unit 4, And we measure very similar things no matter what the software to really draw correlations about what can a customer expect during an implementation. The reason I started the company, a little over 3 years ago, was to help customers make a very independent choice in a partner and know who's good based upon what that partner had done in the past. But the interesting thing is once we look at the data, as an aggregate set, we can start to see trends. We can start to see trends about an individual SI, about types of SIs, so the big five versus independents versus, boutique. And we can also make very strong correlations about a software vendor as well. So how do all of their partners perform against their peers? So it's really interesting when we take a bird's eye view, that's the name Raven, at the data to say, okay, what's actually happening in the world of implementation? And there's some bright spots, but there's also some big challenges that we've seen this year too.
Thomas has a question for you. Do you follow up after the product has been delivered? The value comes in using the delivered solution?
Yep, absolutely. We measure, we ask the customer what stage of the implementation is this, but in most cases, it's after go live, once the project has been completed. So yes.
And so how would you sort of take the data that you're gathering in the context of this discussion? What can we say right now about the role of third-party services firms in so-called customer success? Where are we with that?
Mm-hmm. I would say it varies really from software to software, from SI to SI. And that's why it's really important, if you're going through a digital transformation, to do an independent selection of an SI, because not all SIs are, equal. And you shouldn't just accept what your software vendor is, recommending to you. This is your decision. It's going to make or break the success of your project. So it's important to look at what are other customers saying and getting a very clear and independent viewpoint of what's the previous track record of an SI. So that's one thing I would say, John, is just a short recap, is it's all over the board. What I will tell you is there's a couple of things about projects that we see very strong correlations with. And that is, we ask, the big question is how satisfied were you with the partner, with the project, and with the software vendor? So satisfaction, that's an easy one. NPS, everybody knows what that is. And it's a 1 through 10. The average is for all three of them between 7 and 8, right? So just in general, if you look at 1,300 reviews, it's between a 7 and 8. However, there are really two main factors that if I look at these answers to these questions, I can almost predict what that satisfaction is. The first question is, did your team change during the implementation? If the customer said they had a significant project team change or even slight team change during the project, automatically that jeopardizes satisfaction, and it's probably going to lead to the project going over time and over budget. So that's one solid correlation. The second is project scoping. So we asked the customer, how precisely was the project scoped? Was it precise? Did you change your requirements and that led to change orders? Did the SI miss certain aspects of the project and so you had change orders that you didn't expect? Or did the SI miss a lot of things and you had multiple change orders? I guarantee if that question is answered, that they had multiple change orders that were not anticipated and not scoped properly by the SI or the software vendor, guaranteed they're going to be a detractor in satisfaction as well as the project going on time and on budget. So certainly we ask those things. So there's some real strong correlations there that we see about a project. And I will tell you in Q3, because we look at our data set quarter to quarter, Q3 had a lot of challenges with project team turnover. And there's some market factors going on in professional services that are leading to this. But it's one thing if you're about to do a project or in the middle of the project you can almost predict in the great resignation world that we're in right now, especially as it relates to PS, that you are probably going to have a team change, and that could jeopardize your project.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because here I am wanting to nail everyone down for the same KPIs, and if my fantasy comes true and the SIs do that, but then halfway through the project the whole team turns over, then so much for my daydreams. Like, the harsh reality of that is going to screw everything up anyhow. So it seems like the professional services industry is something of a moving target right now. I mean, you were also talking the other day with us about this notion of remote versus on-site and how that's not resolved. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
And by the way, Josh, feel free to ask questions as well now that we've...
I'll get in. Don't worry.
Okay. No, just feel free.
I'm not shy.
Yep. No, I don't worry about that.
So this idea, great resignation, that's happening, says that 40% of the workforce is either looking for a job or has changed jobs this year. And that there's a lot in the pandemic and, the change in the world of work that's behind this. However, what's significant to us in our world of enterprise software is that professional services is the number 2 industry right now for turnover. It has the highest turnover right behind the retail and hospitality verticals. And so it is double what it was last year. And as a result of, and it's not just consulting. So certainly consulting is a huge.
So Bonnie, just real quick, doesn't that mean that they have to change their taglines from "we have the best people" to "we had the best people"? But they quit.
Have someday, right?
Yeah, and maybe we'll have them again when they come back. This is really awkward.
That's right. And we're training the best people because they just got hired.
Ouch.
Or you're training the best people for us. Yeah, right. That's
ouch.
That's right. Yeah. So, and I of course, we interface with consulting teams all the time at Raven. And so I was talking with a couple of consultants last week who said that hands down, the reason for this is the lack of travel, and, that their lifestyle and their, work style has been to deliver projects on site. And that without this face-to-face interaction, without the ability to travel and be one with the customer team, that's changing the job entirely. So that's been the just the lack of travel, the lack of in-person relationships is really weighing heavily on professional services, on consulting, and on these projects. And whereas certainly they're reducing the cost and T&E and speeding things up to some extent, we've also seen a lot of customers saying, I don't receive the same sort of, dynamics in a meeting. We don't get people who voice objections like they had in the past. My stakeholders aren't actively engaged in the project like they need to be because everything is, in this new virtual world. So it's in some ways, I think we were rah-rah for a while on how this is accelerating projects, but it's creating its own set of obstacles as well.
So, Bonnie, I can understand why there's so much turnover in the retail and hospitality sector, because frankly, those industries are brutal right now, and the jobs pay terrible, and basically they suck. But I don't understand why the professional services industry would be undergoing that level of turnover. Doesn't that imply that some of these services firms are doing something wrong in terms of retention?
I don't know necessarily that it's all that they're leaving. I think there's other opportunities that are becoming available too, and we see a lot of SI swapping. So consultants going to a different firm, for more money, better role, that sort of thing. I think the best firms out there are paying very close attention to, retention and making sure that their talent stays. But those firms that, sort of struggled in the past with culture and being able to motivate, onboard, and, create potential with their current employee base. They're the ones suffering right now with churn.
I'm going to add 2 data points that just interesting. The first is I was actually on a call with a rather large enterprise software vendor just this morning, who said, they're finding that professional services is the fastest growth sector for them in terms of selling digital transformation. That this sector is transforming itself, and we think, we can say that's a reflection of what's going on. The other thing is that, a lot of, and I don't know if I'd be interested in both of you's take on this, there's a tremendous amount of effort now to automate as much of service delivery and implementation as possible. And that pressure to automate and to use artificial intelligence is really, I'm starting to see some actual results. There's some really great, particularly in this, again, some of the boutique partners I'm working with directly have some really great tools to do that. But I'm wondering, if there's also that, the nature of the job is changing too. It's going to become more automated. It's going to, and I'm wondering if there's some of that, that skill, the skill retention problem has to do with the fact that the whole industry is, in its own kind of process of dynamic change. And I'm speculating. I really don't know. I'm just kind of curious because it's interesting.
Hey, Carl, nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a bit. You say you have seen zero turnover in your SAP consulting business. If you have a chance, perhaps type into the chat a little bit about why you think that is, because maybe a few of these firms could learn from your example.
Yeah.
Just real quick, Bonnie, on this topic before we move elsewhere, how should customers deal with this? Because that type of turnover isn't healthy for. We're talking about the customer success in an SAC context. It's not particularly healthy. So how would you cope with that? Like, would it be something that factors into your vendor evaluation? And if so, could you kind of get some flavor for this turnover by digging onto your site or elsewhere, or how would customers deal?
Yeah. So I would ask the hard questions during the partner selection. What is your turnover rate? What do you anticipate it to be? You can certainly, on any one of our reviews, look at a track record by SI to see how much turnover they've had individually on projects. It's one of the questions that we ask. How much, did your team turn over? Was it a little? Was it a lot? So that's definitely one of those things that you'd want to vet. But asking those questions during the selection, I think, is really prudent. Asking, what's your retention strategy? And then finally, contractually, if it's possible to write in named resources into your contract to ensure that there's no potential bait and switch that happens, not that ever happens, that will just, it's just one more step to ensure that yours isn't going to be the first project that they pull resources off and assign to another. I mean, the other reality is, in terms of churn, is not just, professional services folks leaving the organization. It's this burgeoning of workload that people have, or these firms have. So it's like, people, you have your A players who will start a project, and then lo and behold, they'll get another big contract in, and we're going to need to move them over here and put our B team on your project. So again, the more that contractually you can sort of lock up your resources, the better. And then certainly, plan for, always have a plan B. If your resources change, what are we going to do? And make sure you have good documentation. So when they do change, or if it's internally that they've changed, so you're going to have your own, if you're a customer, your team is probably going to change internally too. Customers aren't immune to this, this idea is, have the project well documented so that knowledge transfer is easier for the inevitable when it happens.
I was just,
let me throw in,
go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, just one other thing, because, which really kind of cuts to the chase to a certain extent. The other way to deal with this as the customer is to work with boutique, smaller vendors who are not going to do that bait and switch, because that's not how they operate. And in particular, I did some work with a small boutique vendor this past year, and had a chance to talk to their customers. And this is the dream engagement. I mean, the customers just couldn't stop talking about how wonderful it was to have they have a partner they could call on, and to have just absolutely rock solid customer support every chance they get, with deep professional expertise on board. And that's a good way to prevent it. Here we go. Carl's, I think, is reaffirming what I just said. Actually.
Yeah. Carl says we're a smaller boutique firm, around 20 employees, 25 contractors, always had a hybrid model, some remote, on site. So in their case, there wasn't much of a change.
Let me just add, the key is these guys can't, the big SIs ride their brand all day long. And, and as we all know, project failure doesn't necessarily get their name in the headline at all. It's always the vendor who takes the hit. The SI steps away, and because of their C-suite connections, these big brand SIs continue to get away with this stuff. No small, Carl, I'm sure you guys, how many headlines could you take that say, Carl's company really screwed it up before you'd be out of business? You can't afford to play that game, and you don't, because it's a true career-ending move.
I want to get to the topic of new business models as well, because especially in the ERP space, not so much in the cloud space, but in the ERP space, business model transition's huge, and getting by on customizations and change orders, as Bonnie described, is a discredited model in my opinion, but or should be. But Bonnie, I think it'd be cool if you could click on a vendor on your site and see if they're above the average in terms of change orders per project, because I think that'd be a really cool way to evaluate vendors. Be like, what is your ratio of change orders on a project basis? So just throwing that out there is
we look at that daily, and our customers, so Raven customers, get that information. So there are some software vendors out there who are much, much better, particularly with change orders, than other vendors. And we certainly have that data, and giving that information back in aggregate is part of what we're able to do. So yes, I think the software vendors who are running toward having that that transparency and independent sort of analysis on how do we look versus others, and look at that information as things to monitor. We certainly have it. That's for sure.
We were actually, Bonnie, you and I were looking at some interesting correlations just the other day. There's some really good ways to slice Raven's data to start driving some of these decisions around who do you work for as a customer, and the vendors, who do you work on in your partner ecosystem to do a better job.
And what I would say is some of the data will probably surprise you. There's certain vendors who have a little bit more hype than is due on the overall performance of their partner ecosystem. So our data sort of takes and makes it real.
LinkedIn user wants to ask what will happen to ERP once the cloud's cleared. That's not a topic we're going to do today, but I probably will do a future ERP show at some point. In the meantime, check Diginomica, plug time. I did a thing on extracting value from ERP in a customer first world, and Brian Summers been writing about the future of ERP as well. Short answer, it will never be the same, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Bonnie, Josh and I are both biased towards boutique specialized services firms for, I think, similar reasons. I want to ask you about your data there. Do you see a higher level of performance there, or is this just Josh and I just being outspoken about it?
Yeah. So we see zero correlation with the size of the firm and overall customer satisfaction. I would say the inverse is true in some cases.
That's a frustrating data point, Bonnie.
Dang it. Bonnie?
Come on, man.
I know. I
stop here. Truth hurts, John. Damn.
Ouch.
But actually, I'm really happy to hear that. Seriously. And I mean it, because and maybe I'll have to temper some of my, my bile towards those large SIs, because they're so big that it is, I think I said that in my blog post. Just Google, pick your favorite global SI, Google search SI name project failure, and watch the results pop up. But apparently that's just maybe a data, they just have more projects to fail on. I don't know.
Well, and just in general, and certainly, we always encourage customers, go out and actually read what customers have to say, because these aren't our opinions. These are what the other customers have reviewed about their projects. In general, those projects are generally more over budget, over time, and have more change orders as well. So that correlates back, as I was mentioning at the top of this, as to satisfaction that is lower versus the mid-size or boutique firms that tend to deliver a little bit more on target.
That's interesting, because one of my concerns about the large SIs is I feel like they're less likely to be accountable to a shared set of KPIs and things like that. But I'm going to respect the data as well, and keep an open mind. I mean, I will say that I think some of the larger SIs, Accenture in particular, has been more aggressive about converting to what I would consider more of a digital first type of model. So in some ways, perhaps the scope of that serves them well. Carl says, for those of us who have been doing this for 25 plus years, you see ERP customer has a natural progression. They always choose a big SI on their initial implementation, the whole you never get fired for hiring IBM theory. Anyway, and then Carl goes on to say, as time goes by, they realize the value for what they get and move towards smaller firms and more independent contractors. Thomas says he disagrees on that one, but Thomas, I'm not sure what you're disagreeing with, because you can't really disagree with Carl's experience. So if you're disagreeing with his most recent points, I would object to that, because that's his experience, but maybe you're disagreeing with something he said earlier. Anyhow, I think that's true, Carl. And the way I'm thinking about it right now, Josh and Bonnie, is that my fantasy of shared KPIs across all the stakeholders in a project is clearly a fantasy at this point. But I do think where we can improve is to encourage customers to be very careful about the firms they select, and that at least can get this conversation heading in the right direction. And I think that's where the big versus small SI thing sort of factors in, more to the point that Carl's making around, don't just go with your prime vendor that you've always worked with before, and because it's a pain to get a new vendor on the approved vendor list, cast your net wide, do your research, and at least now we can start to have that conversation around, KPIs from there. But we have to start with a better selection process, and so maybe this is where some of the research tools you're talking about, Bonnie, can really help.
And what we've seen is some of the big firms actually subcontract to the independent and boutique. So you might end up hiring a big five, but actually getting resources assigned to you they're subcontracting out through smaller niche vendors. So don't assume that it's, because it's the brand name that that those are always resources that you're, guaranteed, so to speak, and they never use contractors. That's not the case whatsoever. And I think, making sure that you, again, do an independent selection and understand what is the track record of success for previous projects like mine that you're basing your decision on. Not, did my SAP rep or Workday rep or Oracle rep walk these guys in the door? That there's no guarantee of success there. And the partner that you choose is going to be the partner that you need to live with. So make sure that it's somebody that's good.
Right. And Thomas is making the point around seeing lots of companies going for mid-size SIs. Yeah, I'm not sure that it's important to really debate if customers evolve over time. But the one thing I will say is I think too many customers play it safe on this topic and go with safer choices, whether they're big names or just whoever gets grandfathered in before, as opposed to a more vigorous and open selection process. So you start by selecting the right firm. And then I think this is where, Josh, this is in your ProQ wheelhouse a little bit, because I think the next step is more regular health checks, because when you at least when you read about the most unsuccessful projects, we can talk about success in a sec, but we talk about customer unsuccess for a moment, when you read the failures, often what I'm struck by is how long these projects were underwater before anyone figured out that to take them into by the time they're down, they're in the emergency room triage, and it feels like the next step after selecting the right partner and the right software vendor is to get that regular health check, right? And to better understand where you're getting off track and to get those course corrections made.
Right. And to do it. Yeah. Sort of. Yeah. You want you sometimes do have to repair the engine in flight and try not to crash in the process. I think, and this is super critical. And more and more the software vendors are putting in, these milestones, these reviews, but there's still, the whole idea with ProQ and doing it on a weekly basis is that we've all seen this. And in fact, we have data from one of our projects where, within the space of 2 weeks, the project went from chugging along to disaster. And it had to do in one particular notable case, just because they were part of any cloud project, almost by definition is going to be a data migration. The data migration tool they were using turned out to be faulty. And back to John's blog post, when you dug under the covers, of course, the contract, the field sales guy who sold that contract promised to migrate every byte of data, every byte of historical data from the on-premise system to the cloud, which is itself a tricky thing to do and might not be the thing you want to worry about in a big implementation. But the fact is that when you got to that one crucial point, bam, the tool couldn't do it. And 1 week to the next, this project went into the toilet. Wait around for that milestone 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the road. And now you've got, back to Bonnie's starting point, you got this one hell of an angry customer. And you lose that initial trust. It's damn hard to get it back. So yeah, I'm all for that. I think this is the problem ultimately with, John, you've heard, and Bonnie, you both heard me say this a lot of time, with transparency comes accountability, and that's for everybody. And the customer has to be willing to look in that mirror and go, yeah, I kind of screwed that one up too. Whether I put the B team on one of my points instead of my own A team, whether I didn't scope it right, whether I kept, I let all my LOB folks in the room and they started throwing change orders all around, and pretty soon the scoping was completely off the wall. There's a responsibility there, and this is the problem. We tend to prefer to just sort of, close our eyes and hope for the best, and you can't do that. I'll add, and this is, we're not going to debate cloud ERP, but the thing about the cloud is that you do get to fail faster, much faster, and much bigger, and in front of many, many more stakeholders, particularly if you're doing a real transformation. So the impact of failure can be, you got to be in there on a weekly basis, because these projects are not 2-year projects anymore. They can be 6 month, 8 month, 10 month, and if now you're talking about a really short window to get this right, or else. So yeah, that's a big deal, definitely.
So as we head towards the finish line of our discussion today, I'd like to challenge ourselves in the audience to share a few things that we think are heading in the right direction on this topic that customers can act on. So Thomas, I will include you in this in the chat. If you would perhaps share a couple of observations on how partners are getting more successful projects across the finish line. Carl and Thomas are having some back and forth, which is good, on project scope and customer size. And Carl, yes, was just kind of giving his own experience there. So good debate, guys. Keep that going. But in the meantime, let's kind of talk about how we're seeing more successful projects come across. I mean, one thing I will say on the optimistic standpoint is that the software to human consulting ratios in SaaS implementations have gone way, way down over the classic large scale on-premise implementations of old. So in the ERP world, it was not uncommon to have a 1-10, 1-15 ratio of software expense versus human expense. And when you think about the questionable results of some of those implementations, that is just a staggering thing to contemplate. In the SaaS marketplace, at least you're seeing more of closer to 1-1. Sometimes it's 1-3 or 1-2, but at least it's in the ballpark. So I do think you're getting towards a better delivery there. But at the same time, that's just cost reduction. That's not, in my mind, true business benefit, which I think is what we're really going for, right? So we don't want to just avoid getting our names in the papers. We want to get awards. We want awards and kudos and handshakes and stuff. But not just because we're the biggest partner and the vendor has to give us an award every year. Sorry, I won't.
Let's not go there. Whoa. Yeah. Hold back, bro.
Yeah, I guess we shouldn't talk about that. But anyhow, so folks, let's talk a little bit about what customers can put into practice now to get better results. Bonnie, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I just want to follow up on that point. You can check all of the boxes that you did right during a project. It was delivered on time, on budget. It fit everything in the box, but it could still fail to deliver the results that you needed that impact your business. So, it's really important to keep the business outcome impacts as your guiding North Star. I mean, all of those individual, how should I say, project milestones and things like that are important, but you don't want to get so into project management that you miss the big picture. So that's really important. I would say, what is some of the things that I see the best SIs and software vendors doing now is really welcoming customer feedback and this idea of transparency. So I've had several SIs who have said, we want to survey every single one of our customers and ensure that if our projects failed to deliver on this project, that we want to go back and make sure that we make it right. And the SIs that have a spirit of transparency and truly put the customer first, and show that visibly and have the proof points behind that. Reviews are a great way to do that. I think are the ones that you want to run toward. And the ones that are afraid of transparency, don't have reviews, don't want to get reviewed, publicly and things like that. Those are the ones that you might want to question. Also, the same way with software vendors. And, for instance, SAP SuccessFactors, they came to us and said, we want to make sure that independently our customers are happy with our SI. With our SI work, tell us, we want to know, we want to get better. You want to run toward the vendors who are not willing to, or don't want to overlook, some of the challenges and fix them versus we have a 99% customer satisfaction rate or whatever that number is. That's so easy to throw up on an investor slide. So I think, again, this idea, the spirit of transparency, the idea of very open and candid customer feedback in an effort to make things right, that's the type of vendor you want to do business with, because in the long term, they're going to be the best partner.
Carl chimed in around, he sees the SaaS model having less customization options, which means less services needed. Carl, I think that's true. I did a post today on my talks with SAP on customer success, and that's one of the points that Scott Russell made in our discussions. And that's one reason why limiting customizations is a priority for a lot of vendors. But I will say that there's a big opportunity, not necessarily less services, but different kinds of services. And so in many SaaS contexts, what services firms are doing there is they're actually going back and upselling various things when, like to Bonnie's point, when they're actually delivering for customers, that's a relationship the customer might want to expand. And there's all kinds of ways to do that, whether it's building industry-specific IP for the customer, ideally that comes out of the App Store instead of a custom build. But whatever it is, like, there's a lot you can do to help a customer to compete that goes beyond maintenance. And so to me, that's the exciting stuff that's sort of like what we talk about next, which is the more advanced benefits. But that's a little bit of a different discussion than we have time to do today. I'm going to paste Josh's blog post into the chat to make sure you guys can see that easily. Josh, any comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this is something it's in the blog post as well. I think it's really incumbent on the customer to look at these projects and to understand and appreciate the change management issues that are going to come up, and to get the right people in, on your end as a customer in the room, talking about what's this project going to look like. What, to Carl's point, there's a lot, there should be more standard best practices built into your software. You should be able to limit the customizations, which are one of the big problems, always have been, always will be, in terms of initial costs as well as maintenance costs. But I think the customers really have to look at this as, this is a project that you're going to have to really think a little differently about than you may have in the past, particularly because, as I said earlier, these projects, because they're about transformative technology, you're going to really transform the company. So, certain vendors will have in their methodology a fit to standard workshop as one of the first things you do when you begin the project. My recommendation, don't wait to the project to do that. Think about that when you're writing the damn RFP. What is it we're really going to do here? And where are these impacts going to be in our company? So when you get to the point where you're actually trying to fit that software to your business, you've actually understood much better what the business wants than maybe you would have had in the past, where it's just throw it all the way over. I'll say to that comment from Miroslav, you also want to really, think about, does everything fit into a public cloud? And am I going to try to cram those square pegs into those round holes? And again, there's got to be a really, I think, an upfront process that maybe was ignored in the past. Or limited in the past, in terms of how do you really, as a customer, get ready to write an RFP and then to actually execute a project. I don't think you just throw it over the wall anymore. No, Mr. Howlett's here. Oh, okay.
He's not sure he's hearing much that suggests life is improved for customers. Josh's point, customer responsibility could be made year on year. Is there real improvement?
Was that a question?
He's asking if there's real improvement in this area. I'm not so sure there is, Dennis, which is one reason why I wrote my post hammering on this topic around customer success, because I don't personally believe the proof points are there yet. And I guess you could say that is discouraging on some level, that the hype has gotten so far away from the reality. I did a separate piece on Cloud ERP where I tried to outline a maturity model for the benefits that I think are possible. And one of my points is that most of those benefits are far beyond go live. And I don't talk to too many customers that achieve a number of them. And so I'm kind of saying to the vendors and customers, like, let's move forward. I mean, I think the thing that people got excited about the last couple of years is that cloud software helped a lot of companies cope with very difficult circumstances and transition into remote working models when their businesses depended on it. And so everyone got a lot of pats on the back for that. But I don't think going forward that constitutes, success in the world we're moving into. That was just a way of adapting for survival. And look, everyone rallied and deserves a lot of credit for that. But I don't think that's going to be enough going forward. Dennis says, thank goodness his cooking is improving. Yeah. I could use one of your meals right about now, come to think of it, but
as long as he's not cooking the books, that's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I guess I would say, if I want to take a more optimistic spin on Den's question, is that I think that these types of conversations are happening more often. I think the things that I like are, vendors and SIs are a little more accountable these days due to the amount of public reviews that happen. Things are a little more transparent. I mean, Bonnie at Raven Intel is one example of that trend, I think. And from a customer's perspective, I think more customers are more informed. And actually, next week's guest, we're going to have a nice debate about that next week. Guess what? I have a guest next week that I actually had to get proof through PR channels. Can you believe that? Unlike these two who could just sign on the dotted line and show up. I got Hank Barnes from Gartner coming on, and we're going to debate this. We're going to debate this concept of the informed buyer and just how informed buyers actually are. Because I think Hank is a little skeptical sometimes about the modern buyer and how informed they actually really are. But the point being, like, there is access to more information more easily. You're not living out of the Gartner playbook as like the stone tablets anymore. And I think that does help customers to be more savvy about their choices. But there's still a lot of troubled projects out there. So I can't really say otherwise. Sorry.
And that's the point. I mean, we there was this assumption that we'll move to the cloud and a lot of problems will magically melt away. And, I've seen in my, obviously more anecdotal analysis, no, we're still seeing a very, very large number of projects that, again, fail to deliver expected value in addition to, on time, on budget. So I think, I don't think the problem's been solved. I think that, what I'm hoping this kind of conversation does is pressure these vendors who have all these customer success executives or board areas that have customer success to really step up and stop just sort of patting yourselves on the back and actually walk the walk and talk the talk. I think that would be pretty exciting.
It's the buzzword boomerang effect, Josh. If you start using buzzwords, people like us are going to start holding up that mirror. Though, as you rightly pointed out, there's also a discussion to be had about the role of analysts in customer success as well.
Yeah, next one.
And having been to a number of analyst events lately, I guess I have to question whether we're doing a very good job either. So sorry to add more kindling to the fire.
Yeah, we could really piss a lot of people off. But yeah.
A lot of esoterica out there, to be honest with you, in the analyst kingdom, and in my opinion, not enough jugular conversations like this one.
Oh, I will also add, at the risk of really getting it in there.
Go ahead, Josh.
Okay, I got distracted by Jochen's question.
Oh, do you want to go there? Can you remember what you're going to say? We'll go to Dr. Wolf's question. Hello, Jochen. How likely do you think it is, John, that large vendors will deliver on your 6 points laid out in the post? Well, look, I mean, I deliberately made that a hard post. I don't think there's a single vendor out there that can check all those boxes yet. But I did include some examples on just about each one of vendors who are doing some of those things that I called upon there, and even the one that might be the most sensitive around providing auditing and licensing dashboards. There are vendors that are talking about that. I had a frank talk with a couple of them as well. Now, some vendors are so modern in their licensing, they don't actually have to provide that because there is no auditing. Yeah. And Josh, you brought up earlier, and we should probably raise this point that we weren't really talking about vendors today, but audits and license reviews are antithetical to customer success. So it's the height of hypocrisy to have a customer success program and not provide your customers with ways of understanding when they're transgressing their licenses with all the data and all the dashboarding that you're capable of today. I would refer people to the Upper Edge blog for a blow-by-blow. They have been posting lately on all kinds of various forms of licensing negotiations and overstepping on audits and stuff like that. So that kind of behavior still goes on and kind of undermines this entire conversation.
That's and unfortunately, I'll just add, not seeing much blood on the floor. Darn.
Den wanted like a big skirmish. Den, I'll try to get into that before the show ended. I just we had other stuff going on, but I'll see what we can do.
Blood on the floor?
Well, there's not much. Den, that's the problem, is that we don't. Josh and I don't disagree that much, so it's kind of hard to have bloodletting here. But anyhow, Go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, Dad. I keep losing my train of thought because you all just keep throwing all these things at me. But I think maybe because we are getting sort of at the top of the hour here, I think, there's the thing that I'm hopeful for is that, this boomerang effect will start to actually have an impact. And, because at the end of the day, we're going to have to do something about where, help on the vendor side. Vendors are going to have to start defining competitive advantage in the cloud in any way they possibly can. And the problem with fit to standard is that fit to standard is, makes everyone look like a commodity. If all you're doing is delivering commodity business practices in the cloud, then what is your value add as the vendor? So there's going to be a point in which you're going to differentiate. I think the same for the SIs actually. And there's this is Carl and a couple of other folks were commenting. I mean, there's a real pressure on these SIs to internal pressure to find the next revenue source. Where are we going to go when all the low hanging fruit has been stripped away by the cloud? And that really has happened. Competing on failure is really a bad idea. I would suggest competing on success be a much, much better one. And I think, and what I was going to say is that when we see in the contracting world, this is a big problem. With how do you do contracting as a smaller company, working with a global SI and a global software vendor who have massive legal teams. This is really a big problem in state local government, where these they have people who do contracts with vendors who are paving roads, and then they have the same guy does a contract with the vendor who's delivering IT services. They're not specialists. So the ability from the vendor standpoint to improve contracting is really, is going to be a big one, I think, because Bonnie and I were, with this thing we've been working on lately, it's really easy just to cherry pick customer failures in the public sector because Public Disclosure, Freedom of Information Act and other things really force that stuff out into the open. And it turns out to be a point of real vulnerability for the vendors who aren't paying attention to this problem and their SI partners. So I think if I were a vendor trying to keep my name out of the headline, I would be looking at this contracting thing and how do I make sure that I'm not in there bamboozling literally a customer, particularly a public sector one, who will then turn around and just, and boy, you start going to some of these deals that have gone wrong, and now you've got a unionized workforce that's starting to line up against you, the vendor. Is that what you really want? No, you don't. Not a good idea.
Not one for the customer success playbook. Bonnie, I'll get back to you in a sec, but I want to do one more thing with Josh. Since I hyped a little bit, you and I settling our differences, which was probably a little bit unfair promotion. Do we disagree on any of this? Do you think?
I don't think so. I think we disagree. No, I think we violently agree. I mean, everything I read in your blog post was just sort of like the yin to the yang I was sort of working on myself. I guess I tend to think that the only way this is going to change is if customers really force it. I think the vendors will continue. I mean, again, we see all these titles with customer success. I used to piss everybody off who had that title. I'd sit them down and say, "Thank you. You're now the new VP of blah blah customer success. What happens to you personally when the project fails? What do they cut off a body part? Do they kill off your bonus? I mean, do you actually have skin in the game as the executive with customer success in your title?" And they would usually run for the exits, and I would never get to talk to them again.
Got it. Hey, while we wrap up, if anyone has a final comment, we're going to be. Brent's disappointed. Brent, I'll try to come through for you in a sec here. Sorry about the popcorn. I didn't mean.
Oh no, I'm taking a hit from John. Okay.
No, not going to take a hit really, but I do want to get into one thing. But yes, Brent, I do apologize, Brent. I tried to make it as exciting as possible, but I can't create a faux feud. But there is one thing I do want to comment on. Oh, Carl, sorry you didn't see the links to the posts. I'm not going to repost them. I already posted them. LinkedIn might have a block on those. So what I would suggest is just go on to Diginomica and type in like read customer success, and then you can find both of them. Sorry, the links didn't come through. So I guess put in final comments now. I didn't really have any issues with Josh's post really. And in fact, like, I think there's something fundamentally correct about the notion that until customers assume ownership over their own projects, then nothing will really change. The one thing I will say, however, is that I think I was disheartened by certain vendors or individuals that I felt took comfort in your post with the focus away from them and onto the customer. So that bothered me a little bit, I'll say. And not I thought your post was awesome. I mean, it was brilliantly written too, but it just frustrated me a little bit from a vendor standpoint because I wanted them to like sit on my post for a little bit. Now, to your credit, you pointed back to my post so many times that like if a vendor wasn't going to go back to my post, it's like their fault because they're not listening to you. But I really wanted them to kind of hold their feet to the fire. And it is interesting how when they read about the customer responsibility, they start to get really excited about let's talk more about what the customers need to do here. And it's like that part is a little bit tricky, I think, to manage as far as how do you keep vendors on their toes but also acknowledge the customer role. And that's the problem with these different audiences.
Well, then honestly, I mean, if my blog post succeeds, then these vendors are going to have to go through Bonnie to get to the customer. So we'll all win because if the customer says, give me the data. And by the way, I'm not interested in your own data, vendors or SIs. Screw that. Let's be really blunt. Self-reported, self-assessments. No, thank you. You need independent. You need the independent third party verified. I think this is sort of a nice kind of virtuous loop. Brent, thanks.
Thanks, Brent. And Brent, I tried to do you a solid there. That was as close as I could come to a true disagreement. But since I did imply that, and probably I link baited you a little bit, so sorry about that. But at least hopefully we delivered on a good discussion. I got really pissed off about a link bait this week on Twitter, if you guys noticed, because this idiot wrote an article saying that he revealed the true ending of The Sopranos during an interview with what's his name now? Sopranos director, forgetting his name. But anyhow, went through the interview and no definitive answer on the ending. And look, who cares about how The Sopranos ended at this point? But it was such a link bait. I don't want to indulge in that. But anyhow, I'm glad you came, Brent, and always good to see you. By the way, folks, you should always catch Brent's shows. Brent does fab job on enterprise discussions on LinkedIn. So, in fact, his show on privacy that he's been doing with the Zoho peeps has been fabulous. That's most Fridays, as far as I can tell. And then his Amazon show is really good too.
Amazon Watch is real fun. Yeah,
which comes on in the Friday afternoons right before mine. David Chase, thank you, appreciate that. Right. Yep, Bonnie, take us home. What are your final thoughts?
Implementation and that initial impression that you have with a software vendor is so critical to get right. And for the lifetime of your partnership, it's going to set you up for success or failure. So make sure that, number one, you're choosing the right software vendor, but number two, that you're choosing the right partner to lead you on that path. And you want to go run toward both the software vendors and the SIs that are open to transparency and ones that are not afraid to show you what their customers have said about former projects and really have the proof points to show, what they are claiming during the sales process is what you're going to get during implementation. Get the implementation right, and you're well on your way to a good transformation.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks all. Thanks audience for keeping us on our toes. You did an excellent job today of keeping us on the hot seat where we belong. Next week, again, I got Gartner's Hank Barnes on the show, which is very cool, especially since yesterday I just poked a bunch of fun at Gartner on a video with Vinny Merchandani about to be released. That's pretty awkward. So yeah, I was poking fun at some of the tech hype, which I think,
Bonnie and I are available next week when Hank pulls
Yeah.
the plug. So yeah, you just let us know. We'll be back.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not
See,
going to
Brent will
discuss.
join in.
I'm not going to discuss the Sopranos ending. I didn't think it was brilliant, but I don't think it was terrible either. But I think it's pointless to talk about whether Tony died or not. If that's what you care about, you missed the point. But anyhow, let's move on from that. Say goodbye. Catch you guys next week.
Thank you. Great
Thanks,
to see you all. Thank